Buongiorno a tutti, sono Daniele Curzi di Sistematica Distribution. In Sistematica mi occupo della parte prevendita per le tecnologie emergenti. Oggi abbiamo il piacere e l'onore di avere con noi Kevin Johnson di Runecast, che ci presenterà la soluzione di Runecast proprio per la security compliance su tutto quello che è il mondo Azure, Kubernetes e VMware e AWS. Kev, this is your time, and let us know about Runecast and how it can help us.
Absolutely. Firstly, thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure to work with you folks over there at Systematica. I'll try to speak a little more slowly than I normally do. I did a webinar in English at the beginning of this week, and I was talking really, really quickly because I had a lot of stuff that I really needed to get in, and yeah, I'll try not to do that.
Thank you.
So I'm just going to talk about security compliance is one of the things that Runecast Analyzer can really help with. But first, let's just introduce you to myself. If you don't know who I am, that's fine. I'm not internet famous, but I am the technical marketing manager at Runecast Solutions. So I do a whole bunch of things. I run a bunch of webinars. I work with our partners and our customers, and internally, I work really closely with our engineering team, with our marketing team, and with our sales team, just to make sure that we're building the best product for our customers and for our partners. As it says on there, I've got a whole bunch of certifications. So I'm an ex-techie by heart. Before I joined Runecast about 18 months ago, I worked for VMware in technical marketing for vSphere Lifecycle. And then before that, I used to run a bunch of consultants focusing on cloud and infrastructure with a bit of a focus on security as well. So I've been a techie for a long time. I think I've been in the industry now about 20 years. If you'd like to learn some more about me, there's a link to my blog there, vit.pro, the podcast that I help to run. And also you can always hit me up on Twitter if you've got any questions about any of the functionality that I talk about today, but you don't manage to get a question in before we all wrap up at the end. I'm going to try and keep it low on the on the actual PowerPoint side of things, because I know, it's Friday and nobody wants to sit through 100 PowerPoint slides. So let's try and keep it lighthearted. So in terms of challenges in modern IT, there's a few that when I'm speaking to our customers and speaking to our prospects and our partners that come up all of the time. Now, organizations typically have been running their workloads on premises using platforms like VMware's vSphere, and typically there's a lot of knowledge in those kind of areas. When you start looking at organizations that are now pushing to the cloud and pushing to modern applications using things like Kubernetes, the first problem that we see is the skills gap. Now, the skills gap is a real thing. I used to work for a consultancy, as I said, and I used to spend most of my time learning new technologies. It left very little time for actual work, which was fun for me because I love learning new things. But that's not the world that most of your customers operate in, realistically. And this is probably one of the areas that they want to speak to you about in terms of helping them to deal with the skills gap that they have, because you have more industry expertise. Runecast Analyzer can really help you to extend into those customer bases and to help those customers really make the most of what they have. So again, the other thing to bear in mind is IT operations budgets are shrinking all the time. The only budgets that are kind of still static are the security budgets. So the fun fact is Runecast Analyzer kind of sits nicely in between those two areas. So it's a great opportunity there. Another area that we hear a lot about, and whenever we go to the big industry conferences, places like VMworld, everybody's talking about multi-cloud. And we want to be able to take our workloads and we want to be able to deploy them wherever makes the most sense. And we want them to be portable between those different those locations. So whether we've got a workload that we want to put in Microsoft Azure, but we also want to make sure that if Microsoft put their prices up or if AWS drop their prices significantly, we can move those workloads. We want that portability. But the challenge is each one of these solutions. So you've got the on-premises VMware stuff, you've got the AWS stuff, you've got the Azure stuff. You might even be talking to customers who are running Kubernetes in production. Kubernetes is something that a lot of people are speaking about at the moment. And my experience is very, very few organizations are heavily using it, but everyone's very interested. So everyone's kind of looking at ways that they can enable themselves. So having visibility across all of these from a security compliance and from a best practices perspective can be really, really important. Compliance side, I kind of hinted earlier about the fact that security budgets are the only things that aren't being cut to the bone. And one of the growing reasons for this is, the compliance challenge is not going away. There's also, if you look at what happened with the gas pipeline in America recently with the ransomware attacks, anything that can help to protect organizations and make sure that they have policies and processes and the technology is set up correctly, these are great tools to have, and Runecast Analyzer can absolutely help on that front. Again, kind of tying back to the multi-platform thing, what we're also seeing is a proliferation of what we call point solutions. So typically, when I say point solution, what I mean is a thing that does one thing, maybe for one specific platform very well. Now, if you start talking to customers about security compliance in the cloud, they will, I can absolutely guarantee you, because every single call I have with a customer, they'll say, oh, we run in AWS and we use AWS Security Hub, so we don't need anything else. And that's kind of fine if what they've got is good enough. But what if it's not good enough? And one of the things that I've learned as I've been doing competitive analysis of other products on the market, because believe it or not, other products definitely do exist, is these point solutions might be they might be good enough, but they're not free, because in the cloud you pay for everything. So it's not just that you only pay for what you use; it's you pay for everything that you use. So you need to bear that in mind. A lot of customers think these cloud native services, they're kind of included, and they're not. They're an extra cost on there. And then you need to have a look at the capabilities that they deliver as well. And then if you kind of extend that, if your customers are looking at multi-cloud, or they have some legacy workloads that they're still running on premises, or they're looking to put some stuff into Kubernetes running somewhere else, they don't have any easy way to see what's going on across those different platforms. They have to log into AWS to see AWS. They have to log into VMware for the VMware. They have to log into Kubernetes. It's a messy situation. And much as I hate the term single pane of glass, Runecast Analyzer can really provide that single management interface that shows you where your problems are, wherever those problems are. The final real challenge that I see a lot is, as environments are growing, and environments are always growing, you very, very rarely see an IT environment shrinking. You might see organizations that say, oh, well, we're reducing our on-premises footprint, so we're getting rid of some of our VMware because we're putting everything in the cloud. That's not reducing your footprint, that's just moving your footprint. So you've just got a different set of information coming in from somewhere else. But as these environments grow, we've got lots and lots and lots more information to process. We have less and less and less time to process them, which increases the chance that we're going to miss things like misconfigurations. We're going to miss things that are potentially security vulnerabilities, and that could have incredibly negative connotations. So the information overload is real. And one of the things that Runecast Analyzer really helps organizations to do is more with less, because we automate all of that checking and all of these manual things. So all you have to do is periodically check the Runecast Analyzer appliance. You can see what's going on. You can see where the problems lie, and then you can see exactly what you need to do to get rid of those problems. So it really helps to kind of bring the signal out from the noise. The last point on this slide is that change is only accelerating. The rate of change is getting faster and faster and faster. And if it's too fast for you now is the time to get out of the industry, because Things are not going to they're not going to slow down at any point. This is the slowest day for the rest of your life. So those are the kind of problems that Runecast Analyzer is really looking to help with. And if we have a look at what we've got on screen here, these are the 5 people who founded Runecast back in 2014. So they were all working for IBM in the IBM Center of Excellence in Brno in the Czech Republic. And whenever there was a problem with one of IBM's managed VMware business customers, that problem would land on their desks. So they'd have to figure out what the problem was, they'd have to fix it, and then they'd have to figure out how to check all of their other customer environments and make sure that they weren't vulnerable to the same problem. And what they discovered, over a period of time, was that 90% of the causes of these problems were already documented. There was already a piece of information, a piece of knowledge out there somewhere that stated, if you have these conditions, then this is going to happen. So they got to thinking, what would be really great is we could take a look at the VMware knowledge base. And the VMware knowledge base has about 30,000 articles published in the English language. So that's a lot of stuff. Nobody ever reads any of that stuff until they get hit with the problem. So what they wanted to do is take all of that knowledge and build some kind of engine that could automatically scan environments and show where the knowledge applied. And that was what Runecast Analyzer was. It was a tool that was built to automate checking against the knowledge base. And then once it found a situation where there was a problem, it would show you where that problem was and what you needed to do to fix it. And, that was great. This was a few years ago. This was long before Skyline was ever born. And, bless them, Skyline is a great idea. Again, I've got some really good friends who still work for VMware, and I think Skyline is a fantastic idea for customers. But there are some situations whereby, you might want something a little bit more. And one is when you look at the number of findings that Skyline Advisor covers. The other is how quickly new findings get added in. And then finally, you also need to send your data to Skyline in order to get any data out of it. Now, some customers, and many of our customers, have security policies that say you absolutely cannot do that. So the great thing about Runecast Analyzer is wherever you run it, you retain control of that data. The data does not go to a third-party server. So we started with a knowledge base, we expanded into best practices, we added the security configuration guide, and then we started adding more and more security features, so compliance checks. And I'll show you a few of those if we get time in a few minutes. I'm just going to take a sip of tea because it's very warm under these lights. Now, if you have any questions, by the way, please do drop them into the Q&A panel. And I will, I'll try to deal with them either as we go through or when we get to the end of the session. So this is what Runecast Analyzer is. It's a proactive Amazon Web Services, Azure, Kubernetes, and VMware management solution. So it's not just about VMware anymore. In fact, we've expanded the scope so much that I would say that actually the VMware side of things is probably a smaller side of what we do now than the cloud. So if you've got customers that are looking at cloud or you're looking at cloud yourself, we can absolutely help you there. And these are all the different systems that we can connect to. Let's see if this works. Nope, doesn't work today. Sometimes the clicker works, sometimes it hates me. There we go. And this is what Runecast Analyzer looks like. So over on the left-hand side of the screen, what you see is our artificial intelligence assisted knowledge parser, which is not a very sexy name. So we call it Riker, which is Runecast AI Knowledge Automation. And what this is, it's an artificial intelligence that we've built ourselves. It's all custom, it's built from scratch by us. We trained it, we point it at all of these different sources of knowledge, all of the different security standards, the VMware knowledge base, the hardware compatibility list, all of that good stuff. It monitors these, and whenever there's new knowledge published, it will read that knowledge. It uses natural language processing, and it will convert that knowledge into machine-readable rules, and passes them down to the Runecast Central repository, which you can see on the bottom left. And this is where essentially all of our customers get their updates. Now, we publish updates on a weekly basis, apart from for security-related issues, whereby we publish them within 24 hours of them being published by the vendor in question. So we're very, very quick at getting this information out. From that central repository, if your appliance has got access to the internet to one specific URL, then you can automatically update. You'll get the knowledge as soon as it's available. However, as I mentioned, we do have some customers who are in environments where internet connectivity is not an option. So we also have an offline update capability. You can always go to your management workstation, download the latest updates, sneakernet them along on a USB key or whatever, and run them through your antivirus, and then you can upload them into the appliance that way. What else have we got in here? So from the appliance itself, which is kind of where the magic happens, we have our patented rules engine. And that rules engine consumes all of these rules that Riker builds. And you point it at things like VMware Cloud Director, at Amazon Web Services, at Microsoft Azure, at Kubernetes, wherever it's running in the world, at vSphere, at VMware Cloud Director. So if you're using any of these technologies, we can absolutely help to highlight problems there. We also have a plugin for ServiceNow that we released towards the beginning of this year. And this allows, if you're using ServiceNow for IT service management, or if you have customers that are using ServiceNow, you can connect it to the Runecast Analyzer instance. And you can have Runecast Analyzer will automatically raise tickets in ServiceNow whenever a new finding is detected. And then if you have the workflows set up correctly in ServiceNow, it will then take it across and it will pass that to the relevant engineering group for that to be dealt with. So that's what Runecast Analyzer looks like in a nutshell. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about the evolution, where we've kind of come from, where we're going with the product. So Runecast Analyzer in the beginning, as I said, was all about VMware's vSphere product. So we did vSphere and that was pretty much it. And then we added vSAN because vSAN's kind of baked into vSphere and we see more and more customers using it. So there's vSAN coverage there as well. There's then NSX. So if you've got customers who are running NSXV or NSXT, we can help with their security, with their best practices, all of that good stuff. VMware Horizon, that was the next thing that came along. And actually what we did around about a year ago now, actually, we ran a promotion whereby we gave the Horizon functionality away free to organizations that were really struggling with remote work. So they were using VMware's Horizon to publish, and they had to kind of make this available very quickly. So we made that functionality available for free so that they could make sure that they were securing those environments before making them available over the internet. We also added support for Amazon Web Services back at the end of 2019. So that's been with us now for about a year and a half. Towards the end of last year, so kind of September, October time, we added support for Kubernetes. This is not there's no specific version of Kubernetes that we support. We support pretty much anything that is a supported release in line with the CNCF's definitions. I think that's the last, it's either the last 3 or the last 4 update releases. One of the last things we released at the end of last year was support for VMware's Cloud Director. And we're working on extending that functionality now. So if you're a service provider using VMware Cloud Director, then we can absolutely help you, again, with all of your reporting, all of your compliance requirements. And then finally, in March this year, so just over a month ago, we added support for Microsoft Azure. Moving forward, in fact, before I get to this slide, moving forward, we're going to be adding support for a whole bunch of extra technologies. So Google's GCP, their cloud platform is going to be the next cloud platform that we add. But one of the other things that we're really looking to bring is this capability to look into those operating systems. So an agent-based approach for Linux and also for Windows to help with security compliance there and put all of that within that single location. So I mentioned here about we can deploy natively to AWS. And that's because we can deploy natively to AWS. You can go to the marketplace, you can deploy Runecast Analyzer into AWS. Now, this might not seem like an amazing thing, but for a long time, we were a VMware product. So the only way to deploy us was to deploy us onto VMware. And being able to deploy to other platforms is important to us because we have customers that run only in Amazon Web Services now. So we're not only of use to you if you've got VMware within your environment. We can help you if you're fully cloud native. So AWS, Microsoft Azure, so you can deploy natively to Microsoft Azure as well. You can deploy natively onto Kubernetes as well. So we support deploying to any version of Kubernetes that supports Helm. So Helm is like a package manager for Kubernetes. So we can, if we have a look here, we can deploy to Amazon EKS, we can deploy to Google Kubernetes Engine, we can deploy to Red Hat OpenShift, HPE Ezmeral, Microsoft's Azure Kubernetes service, and the one that everyone seems to want to talk about is VMware's Tanzu, so Tanzu Kubernetes Grid. So you can deploy to any of these using Helm and run Runecast Analyzer wherever it makes sense to you. And I've got a quick video here, which will just show you me deploying Runecast Analyzer to Kubernetes on Minikube running on my laptop. So this is a good excuse for me to take a breath and have a drink. So over on the right-hand side, we can see the Kubernetes dashboard for my laptop. I'm now deploying it. We can see the pods are coming up. We've got some errors. Those will disappear, and everything is now available. So now I just do the port forwarding. And once that port is forwarded, there we go. I can now log in to Kubernetes, to Runecast Analyzer running on Kubernetes on my laptop. And it works in exactly the same way as it would if it was on Azure or in AWS or running on vSphere, for example. And one of the things, just kind of to come back to the whole thing around native, the cloud native security offerings. So if you're running on Microsoft Azure, for example, Microsoft Azure has the Azure Security Center, which has a regulatory compliance capability. Now, there is a free functionality there. It's basically the best practices. And that's cool because everyone wants to be able to run in line with best practices. If you want to do any kind of regulatory compliance, you need to buy what's called Azure Defender. And that works out as, I think it works out around about €12 a month. It's all obviously charged per hour. So it depends on the length of the month and all of those things. But that's for a virtual machine. It's about €12 a month. So once you kind of scale that up, that gives you some kind of ideas as to how much that's going to cost you. But the more important thing than cost for me is if we take a look at this screenshot, and this screenshot was taken probably 2.5, 3 weeks ago, but this kind of shocked me. So if we look here, we can see they're working with the Azure CIS benchmark 110, which is about 9 months old. It's in fact, it might even be a little older than that. So the latest version is 1.3.0. which is what Runecast Analyzer works with. So if you want the latest versions of those standards, maybe that's not a great fit for you. The bigger shock to me was this bit, which just says, essentially, just because we give you a green check mark for all of the checks that we give you doesn't mean that you're compliant with the standard. It means that the checks pass, but we don't have checks for, we don't have automated checks for everything. And some checks we can't automate. So it's only a partial view of your overall compliance status. If you want to be fully compliant, you need some other tooling. Runecast Analyzer, obviously, I'm going to tell you this, but Runecast Analyzer will do you a check for absolutely everything in CIS, whether it requires a manual check or we can automate it. Because obviously not everything is exposed natively through the Azure APIs. And on that note, let's have a quick look at the product itself. There we go. So this is Runecast Analyzer just running in our lab over in Brno. And we can see from here, I'm connected to a whole bunch of different systems. So I've got some VMware, some Horizon, some Amazon Web Services, some Kubernetes, an NSXT Manager, VMware Cloud Director, and an Azure instance as well, an Azure subscription. So if we wanted to focus in on any one of these, so maybe we're interested specifically in Amazon Web Services, for example, we can absolutely do that. We can really drill in. And then we have a custom dashboard here that shows us, what our problems are. So from an AWS perspective, we can see we're hitting 12% of the CIS benchmark, which is not good, which is why you see it's in red. We're hitting 46% of compliance for GDPR, 51% for ISO 27001, and 0% for PCI DSS, for example. Now, it may be that not all of these are relevant to you as an organization, but the important thing to understand from a security and compliance perspective is that it doesn't matter. We don't bill you for all of the standards that you use. We just bill you for the technology. So if you're using AWS, we bill you for AWS. You get all of the functionality for that technology that's built into the product. You just need to turn on the relevant ones. Excuse me. If we start looking at security compliance, for example, so for AWS, we've got coverage of CIS, GDPR, ISO 27001, NIST, and PCI DSS. So, it's pretty comprehensive. These are all the latest versions of the standards. For some of the others, so for example, for VMware technologies, let's just switch to, let's have a look. So for vSphere 6.7, for example, we have, need to close that and reopen it. No, I need to refresh, I remember. So we have a whole bunch of extra standards in there. So if we look at that specific vCenter, we're checking that for compliance against Germany's BSI standard, CIS for CIS benchmarks, the UK's Cyber Essentials, the American DISA STIG, the Australian Essential 8. You'll see we've got some regional standards in here as well. So we're always looking to add more standards into the product because our customers ask us for them. And we're a very, very customer-driven organization. So we work with all of these things. And the important thing to understand about our security compliance is we're not just going to show you, we're not just going to say, well, you're going to fail this particular check. What we do is we help to map the checks to your environments. So if you consider from a security compliance perspective, ISO 27001, for example, is not written about vSphere. It's not written about NSX. It's written at a very, very high level. And that high level overview, you then need to, as a technician, you need to read that and understand what they're talking about and then apply it to your environment. So what we do is we take the ISO controls. So for example, here we've got ISO A1261, which is all about the management of technical vulnerabilities. And I should come back to vulnerabilities in a moment, actually. So this basically says information about technical vulnerabilities of information systems being used shall be obtained in a timely fashion, yada, yada, yada. So what we do is we then translate that from the wording that's in the standard, which is not about VMware. In this case, this is a VMware particular bug or a VMware vulnerability. And then we translate that into a technical description, which says, this is what you should actually do. This is how ISO 27001 control A1261 means to you. Now, if you have multiple different technologies in your environment, you might find that there are multiple things that you need to refer to. But we always show you how it applies to you. We then give you an audit procedure. So in this case, we can validate this by running this specific Power CLI commandlet. We can also have a look at the findings, and the findings show us all of the objects that are affected by this. So we can see here, we've got quite a lot of virtual machines. We've got 26 virtual machines in total. And it would appear that, yeah, they all have the same VGA only is either not set or it is set to false. So that would fail you an ISO 27001 audit. So we're giving you not only the details of, what the problem is and where the problem is, but also how to fix those problems. And, we could go through all of the other different standards as well. But realistically, they all work in a very, very similar fashion. Each standard has its own specific terminology that it uses. So if we look at PCI DSS, for example, PCI DSS uses the concept of control IDs. I'm not sure what's going on there. Let's go to all systems. So PCI DSS talks about control IDs. DISA STIG talks about vulnerability IDs, for example. So they all use their own terminology. We help to map them back to the technology that you're using. And just kind of jumping back to the talk of vulnerabilities, something that we added in recently. So we always had the data about where the vulnerabilities were in your environment and what you need to do about them. But what we didn't necessarily do is make it really easy to see at a high level what problems you have. So we added this widget a couple of weeks ago, this vulnerabilities detected. So it's all well and good, if you have a specific CVE or a specific VMware security advisory applies to your environment, if you know what terminology to look for, you could always go and search for that and we'd show you where it was. But now you log into Runecast Analyzer and you see, oh, we've got 37 vulnerabilities. So you don't even have to check if there's been another, some new vulnerabilities published. As soon as there's anything, it's going to highlight that there. And we can see, for example, here we have the microarchitectural data sampling vulnerability. So this is one of the side channel attacks that affects Intel CPUs, for example. So we can highlight all of these things. And often, in fact, one of the things I discovered in my time at VMware is a lot of these vulnerabilities, people think, okay, well, there's a vulnerability, there's a patch available for it, I apply the patch, I'm now safe. But often that's not the case. So again, if we look in here, what we actually have to do here is we have to apply a patch. So we update vCenter server, and then we patch an ESXi host. And that's as far as a lot of people got. But the problem is they're still vulnerable to that attack because they haven't gone through the rest. So what you have to do is you have to decide on a specific side channel aware scheduler. Now, by default, neither is selected. There's two types of side channel aware schedulers. Type 1, which is the most secure. But the problem with the most secure one is it basically turns off hyperthreading within your environment. So if you have a heavily overcommitted environment doing a lot of context switching, the performance impact of that was up to 100%. Now, that isn't acceptable for a lot of organizations. So what they did was they said, actually, we're going to accept the extra risk. So you had the option of side channel aware version 1, or you accept the risk. And then a little later, VMware brought out another scheduler called side channel aware version 2. And side channel aware version 2 made it a little bit more secure, and it reduced the impact of the actual workaround or of the fix. So it wasn't quite as secure as side channel aware version 1, but also it didn't absolutely murder your hosts. Because a lot of organizations really, really would have struggled to just go out and buy another 100% of their estate, because it's not just servers, you've also got VMware licensing, et cetera, to consider. So we show you all of these things, and we will show this as a finding until you've taken all of the steps required. And we will always show you the steps that you still need to do. Let's see if we got one in here. So this is the inter-VM ones. So this applies to virtual machines. No, that's not the one. There is one that is part of that same family, whereby you need to upgrade the VM hardware, then you need to power cycle the virtual machines as well. And again, until you power cycle those VMs, you've still got problems. A couple of other things that we can really help with. So if we just actually go back to the security compliance, we have this capability within the product to build views and export reports and things. So we could always build a filtered view. So maybe we want to look specifically at, I don't know, ISO controls A9. So there's quite a few of A9. And in fact, I'll show you manual checks as well, because I mentioned that earlier. So a manual check is something that we can't automatically check. That sounds like an obvious statement. A lot of security software, what they will do is they will say, we just didn't do this check because we can't automate it. We at Runecast believe that what you should do is highlight that there is a thing that needs checking and prompt you to manually check that. So if I scroll down, let's just show a few more of these findings. There we go. So we can see here, we have a whole bunch of manual checks. There we go. So in this case, if multi-factor authentication is not supported and passwords must be used, the NSX vCenter must enforce password complexity by requiring at least one numeric character to be used. Now, this is not something that can be automated because the data is not exposed through the vSphere APIs. So we can set a policy here, but we need to essentially state that we've answered this. So we show you the object that you need to check. We hit edit and we say, is the password complexity policy set to at least one numeric character? So you then manually go and you follow the instructions, you run the check and you say, yes, we're happy with this. And we're happy with this for another, I don't know, until the end of August, for example. Once the end of August comes round, this is going to be reported as a finding again. And in fact, what we'll find has happened, once this page reloads, let's just do it this way. So what we'll see happens is that anything that was listed as a manual check will actually be down at the bottom, and it will be a manual with a C. So it will say there's been a manual check, but it's a pass because you've stated that you've configured these, for example, here. So that's manual checks. We also have the concept of custom profiles. So if you have your own custom security standards, you can build your own custom security standards and run checks and reporting based on those as well. Final one I'll show you is the hardware compatibility side of things. So this is something we get a lot of really good feedback about. So this is specifically a VMware thing, but because we scan the entire environment, we know exactly how the hosts are configured. We know what firmware they're running. We know what drivers they're running, the BIOS, all the versions of the different software that's running on those hosts. So we can tell you, we also know what's on the VMware hardware compatibility list, and we can see immediately where we've got problems. So this host, for example, it's a PowerEdge R730. You've probably got some in your own data centers. It's running ESXi 6.5, probably time to start, updating those things soon. But it's running a BIOS that is not in the HCL. And if we look down the HCL here, we can see 270 is the highest that's supported. So we've actually upgraded the BIOS beyond what is supported by the operating system. We do the same thing for I/O devices, so network cards, host bus adapters, fiber channel cards, all of that kind of stuff. And here what we do is we validate the hardware against the firmware that's running on that hardware, and also the driver that is running in ESXi. So here we can see the driver that we're running is 691020, which is a supported driver. The problem we've got is that the firmware that's on that hardware is running 21.2.5. And the minimum supported firmware for that driver is 21.3.4. So we need to upgrade that firmware, and that will bring us into compliance. And these kinds of things cause all kinds of problems in environments. And it's the same thing for vSAN, for example. So if we have a look at vSAN controllers, if you're running vSAN, we validate the driver and the firmware together. So it's not enough that you just have a driver that's supported and a firmware that's supported. They have to be validated together. So here we've got a driver 2030, which is supported. It's on the hardware compatibility list. We've got a firmware 688, which is supported, but they're not supported together. So we need to either downgrade the firmware or upgrade the driver. And then if you're in the process of planning a vSphere upgrade, for example, great stuff. If we were to upgrade everything in this environment to vSphere 7 Update 2, here's all the problems we've got. So again, it's the exact same thing. We've got the full export capability. So if you're planning these kind of operations, we can absolutely help you with this is what you've got now, this is what's going to happen. So you can identify hardware that you might need to replace. So from a reseller, from a consultancy perspective, maybe this is a really good opportunity. If you've got a customer that's looking at upgrading vSphere, you can go in, deploy Runecast Analyzer, run a check and go, okay, all of this hardware needs to be replaced. Incidentally, here's a quote for a replacement for all that hardware and the professional services that we'd be able to deliver in order to bring you up to date there. So there's a really good opportunity there as well. On that note, I should probably, no, wrong way, jump back to the slides. We're pretty much at the point of wrapping up. I think we've got about another 5 minutes. But just to kind of give you some ideas, if you've got any questions, please do drop them in. But in terms of our customer base, we've got customers all over the world. We've got some really big organizations like Fujisoft, organizations like Chevron in the gas and oil industry, Pure Storage. So Pure Storage are both a customer of ours and a partner of ours. Scania, Avast Antivirus, Verizon. There's a whole bunch more as well some that I can't talk about as well. We do a lot of work in the military and also in kind of central government as well. So not so many people we can talk about there, but just a couple of testimonials. So ProBTP are a construction organization in France, and they use Runecast Analyzer essentially to save them massive amount of time in terms of troubleshooting problems within their vSphere environment. So they've got about 6,000 staff. They're a really good customer of ours based in France. De Volksbank, I'm actually doing a webinar with Rob from De Volksbank on Tuesday next week. So again, in the finance, the banking industry, this really helped to increase uptime, and uptime is obviously very important in those industries. Any downtime costs you money. And again, it was all about really helping them to work more proactively, getting rid of any potential problems within their environment before they caused an issue. ONI, this is the last one. So these are a really small organization if you think in terms of employees, but they've got some really big customers. So they're a data center managed services provider based in the UK, and they managed to go down from having some issues on a monthly basis to having 0 issues every single month. They reckon they tell us they save 70 to 80% man hours in terms of troubleshooting. So I actually did a webinar with those folks towards the middle of last year. And one of the really, really impressive things about them is, as a managed service provider, as a hosting provider, they offer a 100% uptime SLA. Now, I've never come across a hosting organization that does that. That's it. It's always like, we'll give you 5 nines, and if you want a 6th 9, then we'll add another couple of zeros to your bill. So yeah, they're able to provide this 100% uptime guarantee, and in, I think it's 6 years they've been running that guarantee. They've never paid out on that SLA. So that gives you some indication as to how helpful Runecast Analyzer has been to an organization like that. So to summarize, in terms of business benefits, we're looking to help organizations to save time, because we're getting rid of the idea of having to troubleshoot, because we show you where the problems are up front. You fix the problems, you don't actually have the issue in the first place. Helping you to reduce outages in exactly the same way. Improving security by highlighting whereby you're not abiding by the relevant security standards that are going to be applicable, and also by things like best practices from various different vendors. Help you to minimize risk, because we're constantly scanning that environment, so you can see as soon as you drift out of compliance. So one of the struggles that organizations have had historically is they rely on an audit once a year, and that happens, and that proves that you're compliant with the standard at that point in time. And then over the course of a year, everything goes out of the window. People do some troubleshooting, they make some configuration changes, and as they make those configuration changes, they mean to put them back once they've fixed the problem. But everyone's busy, people forget things, so we can show you where you have these risks there. And finally, we can help you reduce costs by preventing outages, by preventing any potential fines that might arise from failing audits, things like that. So that's kind of what we're looking to do. And we've got a really successful partner network across Europe, across the world. We are looking, potentially at onboarding some more. And if you'd be interested in partnering with Runecast, the folks at Systematica are absolutely the people to go to. So on that note, if anyone wants to learn a bit more, you can go to our website, sign up, and you can get a 14-day trial and deploy into your environment. This is a standard end slide, so you can get hold of us if you want to discuss about anything. But I would really, really urge that you speak with the folks at Systematica. They're super, super smart. We work really, really closely with them, and they're just speak to those folks. They're the best. On that note, that's everything that I've got. So hopefully, there we go. You are still there.
Thank you, Kev. And I hope the conversation goes well. I will switch a little in Italian to thank all the people. Grazie a tutti. Per qualsiasi informazione o anche per i nostri servizi di advisory, proprio con il servizio di Runecast, potete contattarci. Potete contattare me, Valentino, o comunque Systematica in generale, e potremo darvi una mano. Grazie mille a Kev. Thank you very much, Kev, for the presentation.
You're very welcome.
E buon fine settimana a tutti dopo questa giornata di webinar anche con Microsoft, con VMware e con Acronis. Grazie mille. Thank you, Kev.
Thank you. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.